The French and Indian War, Britain's mistake that sparked the American Revolution.
But before we start, please support us by pressing like and subscribe buttons. Also turn on the bell notification to get the latest updates. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you.
In the dense wilderness of North America, where pine forests stretched unbroken and rivers carved through wild, unclaimed territories, a struggle ignited that would echo far beyond the battlefields. Known to Europeans as the 7 Years' War, the conflict in the American colonies took a different name, the French and Indian War. Lasting from 1754 to 1763, it was more than just a territorial dispute between Britain and France. It was a crucible that would forge a new American identity, sow the seeds of resentment, and set the 13 colonies on a path toward revolution. At the heart of the war was the Ohio River Valley, a fertile and strategic region that both the French and British claimed. For the French, it was the lifeline connecting their Canadian holdings to Louisiana. For the British, it represented new lands for westward expansion. Native American tribes, already displaced and wary, found themselves entangled in the ambitions of empires, forced to choose sides in a war not of their making. In the beginning, it was the French who held the advantage. They had established a web of alliances with various indigenous nations, most notably the Algonquin, Huron, and Ottawa tribes, through years of fur trading and diplomatic relations. Their presence in the interior was light, but strategic. A chain of forts and a network of native allies offered control without occupation. In contrast, the British colonies, with their rapidly growing population and hunger for land, pushed aggressively westward, often clashing with indigenous peoples and disrupting delicate balances of power. When a young George Washington led a poorly equipped Virginia militia into the Ohio Valley in 1754, his failed assault on Fort Duquesne, an outpost of French power, sparked the first shots of the war. Though the skirmish was minor, the implications were massive. Britain and France formally declared war in 1756, and soon, fighting spread across Europe, Asia, and Africa in what would become the first truly global conflict. But it was in the American colonies that Britain's early missteps would prove most costly. The British underestimated the resilience of French colonial strategy and the effectiveness of indigenous warfare. French and Indian forces used guerrilla tactics, ambushes, raids, and swift retreats that confounded British regulars, trained for open field battle. Fort after fort fell to the French. Settlements burned, colonists panicked. In 1756, the British suffered humiliating defeats at Fort Oswego and later Fort William Henry. These early losses shook British confidence and exposed the fragility of their grip on the frontier. Compounding these military failures was the economic toll. Funding a war across the Atlantic stretched British coffers thin. Troops had to be transported, fed, and supplied. Naval blockades were costly. As years passed, the British government borrowed heavily, plunging deeper into debt. To pay for it, they would later look to the colonies, an act that would backfire spectacularly. But fortunes changed in 1758 when Prime Minister William Pitt the Elder took control of the war effort. Pitt poured resources into the American front, understanding that control of North America was vital to British imperial supremacy. He dispatched thousands of troops, hired colonial militias, and subsidized their costs. With renewed vigor, the British captured Fort Duquesne, renamed it Fort Pitt, and began driving the French from the interior. The turning point came with the fall of Quebec in 1759. By 1763, the Treaty of Paris ended the war. France ceded nearly all its North American territory. Britain emerged victorious, but at what cost? The end of the French and Indian War marked the beginning of a new troubled chapter between Britain and its colonies. The debt Britain incurred, over 130 million, needed to be repaid. The logic in London was simple. Since the colonies had benefited from the war, they should help shoulder the burden. What followed was a cascade of policies and taxes that would ignite colonial fury. The Proclamation of 1763 was the first affront. Seeking to stabilize relations with Native Americans and prevent further conflict, Britain forbade colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains, land many had fought for or already claimed. To American eyes, it felt like betrayal. Then came the Sugar Act 1764, the Stamp Act 1765, and the Townshend Act 1767, each imposing taxes or regulations that colonists found increasingly intolerable. More than just economic burdens, these acts were symbols of a deeper injustice: taxation without representation. The war that had secured British dominion now revealed the fracture between imperial control and colonial rights. The irony was bitter. Colonists who had once fought under the British flag now questioned their loyalty. The shared victory over France had not united the empire, it had divided it. British soldiers, once seen as protectors, became symbols of oppression. The war, which had temporarily aligned colonial and British interests, now underscored their incompatibility. Moreover, the war had taught colonists something vital. They could stand up to a European power. Colonial militias, though ragtag and uneven, had gained experience and confidence. Men like George Washington emerged with a sense of possibility, of leadership, and of military capability. The war had introduced Americans to the complexities of alliance building, logistics, and strategy, skills that would become essential in the revolution to come. Equally important was the shifting colonial mindset. The American colonies had grown, rich during the war, supplying British troops and trading goods. Their economies matured. Their political assemblies gained strength. As they became more self-reliant, the idea of independence, once unthinkable, began to seem not only possible, but necessary. By trying to solidify control over its empire, Britain had miscalculated. The very war it fought to secure its colonies had awakened a spirit of resistance. The British crown had overreached, blind to the transformation taking place across the Atlantic. In the effort to impose order and recoup costs, it had alienated the people it most needed to govern. Thus, the French and Indian War was not merely a prelude to revolution, it was its incubator. The conflict reshaped colonial America in profound ways. It exposed the limits of British authority, it tested and tempered American resolve, and it revealed the contradictions at the heart of empire. That control by force breeds rebellion, that victory without understanding leads to ruin. When revolution finally came in 1775, it was not a sudden storm, but the culmination of years of tension seeded during the war. The musket fire at Lexington and Concord echoed the shots fired in the Ohio Valley decades earlier. The path to American independence, winding and bloodstained, began not in Philadelphia or Boston, but in the shadowed forests where British redcoats first clashed with French scouts and native warriors. The French and Indian War was Britain's mistake, an imperial triumph that birthed a democratic dream. What began as a struggle for territory became a struggle for liberty. And in the ashes of empire, a new nation stirred, destined to challenge the very monarchy that once claimed it.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.